what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Footcandle Films. Film news and reviews from two guys who really like movies.
This episode is brought to you by the Footcandle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Today they are here because what their parents have been doing. Knowingly, unknowingly, their parents have done a crime or a mistake. But I would not want the same thing happen to them.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Footcandle Films. We've got a special little episode here for you, a little break from our normal format where Chris and I will sit around and talk about film reviews and give some movie news. We actually have something a little special to hear today. We recently performed a screening of a documentary called Waiting for Mamu, and we'll tell you a little bit about that story here in just a moment. But Chris and I are joined with the writer of the film and someone who really just made it all happen, Thomas Morgan. Thomas, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. We're looking forward to talking to you about the film a little bit. We'll give a little bit of background on there. Chris is with me as well. Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing good. I'm glad we have a guest. It's nice to have a guest.
This is like one of the first times we've had a guest around the table for this show, isn't it?
It is.
It's kind of nice. Right. I'm a little uncomfortable. I mean, I'm used to just the two of us, and now there's a third person. I don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, now if you say bad things about the film, right? You have to face me.
We have to
look
say,
me
yes,
in the face.
We love the film. No, we will. Let's just give a little background to this film. This is a film we just screened recently. We mentioned it in one of our previous episodes is upcoming. And Thomas, you can help us elaborate on it too, but we showed this film, and I got to tell you, it got a lot of great reaction from the crowd. I mean, we're talking about a documentary of the CNN Hero of the Year award winner, Pushpa Basnate, who formed a development center for children. Basically, she took this idea of almost like a child development center, a place for kids to go, those that were affected by parents who had been imprisoned. And this is happening in the country of Nepal, where, and I know we can probably talk a little bit about some of the story behind this, but so in Nepal, the idea is that if kids are of parents that are arrested for a crime and the parents are sent to prison, if there's no other family member that can then take care of the child goes to prison with the parents.
Right. And it's not punitive towards the child. It's simply the economics there don't allow for them to have any other system. So the choice is you either send your kid out to the street or they sit in prison with you. And frankly, they're probably safer in the prison, so that's where they go. And and Pushpa, it's developed into what some would look at and say it's an orphanage, but it was her home. I mean, she basically just took her house and her home and said, let's let kids come live here and live with me. And so it's really an amazing story of a family that she creates from kids who come from various backgrounds and horrible stories.
And the idea behind it would be, too, that if somebody like Pushpa didn't exist and wasn't bringing the kids out, the kids would basically grow up in the prison if their parents were there for life.
That's right.
And so maybe by the time they're 18 or a mature age they consider, then they're released back into society as adults, or how does that work? Okay.
So they can leave. I mean, the children with, the parent can say, my child wants to leave now, and they could walk out.
But that's a dangerous proposition out there.
A very dangerous proposition. Yeah. And when you take into account the fact that they didn't have a guardian with whom they could live to start with, they're really out there on their own. Right. So maybe 16 or 17, they decide they're going to leave, but they've grown up in that prison situation completely uneducated and really not learning any life skills beyond what you would learn in prison. So the system really perpetuates itself because these are children who then get out and don't know any other way to earn a living. And then they think, well, the way I saw my mom do it was to carry drugs for this guy from here to here. And it's a very, very difficult situation.
So through the situation, and again, what your documentary is really talking about is Pushpa making the decision to basically open up her home and bring these children in, give them a very nurturing, caring, development-based environment, and getting them prepared for, I guess, the real world and letting them grow up as traditional kids that we would expect to see.
I think what's interesting, though, is Pushpa kind of did this reluctantly. Like, she never thought that this would be her life. She never thought that this is where she would end up. And when she started, she just thought, I have to help this one particular child. And from that, it led to this organization. But I think her story is amazing in that she raises these kids like they're her own kids. She hurts when they hurt. She goes to the school. She pays full tuition for each one of them to go to school and when I asked her about that, she said, I do it because when I go to the school with a problem, I want to be treated like every other parent. And it really pains her. In fact, in the movie, she says, I wish often that the parents would never come back, but the reality is they come back. Sure. And I cry when they leave, and so it's just such a giving and unbelievably compassionate position that she puts herself in, and that she gives to these children for this period of time in their lives, and some forever, but most just for a period of time.
Well, as I mentioned, when we screened the film just a couple of weeks ago, got some great response from the audience there. And I know you had a conversation on another one of our shows and went into a lot of detail about kind of the origination of the story and how you got involved in it. Chris and I, we got some questions. We want to talk to you a little bit about the film itself and kind of the production and the process behind it and see how it really came to be. So I think a lot of our listeners would be really curious about that. Sure. First question I've got, Chris, if you don't mind if I just jump right in on some of those there. You told us a little bit during the screening, and it may be a little repetitive, and if so, that's fine, just for people listening. But is this something have you always had a desire to do something in documentary filmmaking and kind of getting involved? Has this been a passion idea of yours, or was it more of this subject matter and some of the subject matters that you come across inspire you to make the film? Which kind of came first, do you think?
No, it was, I was always interested in film, and I always thought, someday when I was a kid, maybe I would be in a film or I would make a film or be part of one. But it was just that. It was kind of this dream that you would. But when confronted with the issue of homelessness and then realizing the which is a film that I've got coming out called These Storied Streets, and when I really came face to face with the humanity of this issue, I thought, how do I help this? And then I was able to think, well, maybe I take this passion that I have for film and this issue and I raise awareness about it. And I tell people all the time, instead of being the guy who shows up and hands out bottled water, let's dig a well. And so my hope is that that's what the films are. They serve as this well of people who say, gosh, I can do something about that. I can get more involved or whatever. So Pushpa's story just resonated with me because it was just someone so relatable and someone who didn't want to necessarily do this for the rest of their lives, but yet, champions for these kids and advocate for these kids. And now from that, it's really kind of those types of people just resonate with me, and I have to seek them out, and I have to figure out why, and I have to figure out maybe how we all become a little bit more like them, whether it's, doing something as courageous as Pushpa did or doing something much smaller but yet significant. So and I want to tell those stories. I think they're great stories for me, and they're great stories for my kids who have, different ideas of what your life is supposed to be like.
As someone who was wanting to make this film, and then once you entered Nepal and you saw your situation that you were going to shoot, what were some challenges that you faced as like, okay, here I am, I'm going to try to make this film? What were I know there may be too many to actually tell, but what were some that immediately spring to your mind that you're like, okay?
Well, the first and foremost, I got the form to fill out to film in Nepal, which is a communist government now and been communist since early 2002, 2003, somewhere in there, to basically saying you're going to do this, 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 and this. You're going to turn over all your footage, and then we're going to review the footage, and we're going to determine what you can use. And so that was like the first thing is I said, how are we going to ever do this? So we chose not to permit. We went in completely unpermitted. We shoot the film on these Canon 5Ds, which are still cameras essentially. And we thought, well, if we get caught, at least we'll know what the inside of the prison looks like. We're going to film there. So, but yeah, that was the first thing. And I was pretty nervous about that. But the second thing that really struck me in pre-production when we got there was, the lack of electricity. So we were going into these conditions where you're only going to get 4 or 5 hours of power a day, and not only are you filming in 4 or 5 hours of light, with the idea that you could put lights up or do anything with lighting, but also you have 4 or 5 hours in which you have to recharge everything. You have to, everything has to be done in this very short, compact period of time, and sometimes that 4 or 5 hours isn't the perfect times to be shooting. So how are we going to manipulate those times, and how are we going to stage that in a way that was most productive?
And as a documentarian, I know sometimes there are windows of opportunity. And did you see certain situations that maybe past that window of opportunity because you were limited by that 4 or 5 hours. There was something you wanted to do, and you're like, man, that would have been great, but I know that I can't because I want to save it for something. Were there certain things that you weren't able to capture?
No, fortunately, the one thing that we really drove from the beginning, and maybe I think most of the time it's because of our budget. The one thing that documentary filmmakers typically are good at is the planning.
Gotcha.
Because you only have a certain amount of time, so we planned, and we knew that even if we had one camera available, we'd always have one available. Okay. Even if we had one set of mics, we could always use this. And so I never wanted to miss that moment because we were so far away. Sure. And knowing we could never get back, to do pickups, or our budget certainly wasn't going to allow it. We planned really well, but you could easily see how somebody would go and get kind of caught in that trap, or easily fall into that situation. The one thing I will say, though, that the lack of light sometimes did affect, because we chose not to take any lights because, again, we're unpermitted. And if you show up with a bunch of lights, they kind of get it that something's going on. But
it might tip them off.
Yeah. So there was there's some times when it was darker, and we had some great moments, but we just couldn't use them because we couldn't get it light enough or look the right way to fit. So those are unfortunate.
Well, and plus I know those, not to get too technical, but I know the DSLRs, like the 5Ds, I mean, they're also maybe not, they're not going to be as like a top level film camera for adjusting for light. So you probably had a lot of challenges just working even with that smaller minimized equipment with the lighting situation too. So
yeah. I mean, but there's the upside and downside of those particular cameras. The upside is the imagery that you do get in the day is unbelievable.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, it's just so perfect. But it is. It's very difficult, and when it's darker. Yeah. But at the same time, the stuff that we did get that was darker, I think it lends itself better to the story because it's an appreciation of the situation. It if it were perfectly lit every time, you would think, oh, they have 5 hours of power. Really, it looks pretty nice to me. So some of that grainy kind of grittiness part of it, and we didn't do one bit of color correction to that entire film.
Wow.
Okay.
Because I didn't want it to feel like it was so beautiful by itself that I thought, why try to manipulate it in any way that doesn't really reflect the true experience that we had.
Well, I got a shout out to the guy who helped you, Francois Caillot.
Yes.
Yeah, when watching the film specifically, I wish I could remember the young lady's name that he was. I guess you were actually doing the interviewing, but it was shot and she was in a darker situation. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But because of the way it was framed and the way it was shot, I had no idea what the behind the scenes were. Well, it was because of the light situation, and it was amazing. So he did a really good job shooting the film, and it looked spectacular.
Yeah, the whole process because of the situations and kind of where you're in, and it really, instead of having very direct, like my title is producer director, Francois is director. Dan Chen is another director on the film, but it's merely because it's just such a collaboration of, okay, how are we going to get this done? It's like every day walking into a situation where you're literally brainstorming about how do we do this, who shoots this, how is this, One of the things that you would see in the film, and this is probably totally calling myself out, but there was parts where I went back afterwards and I re-recorded the question because we had Ali Sandler, one of our producers, asked the question to some of the girls who were more comfortable answering to a girl instead of a bunch of guys standing there. So she would ask the question, but for continuity purposes, I would just restate the question that she already asked, and we dropped it in. But but it was just like all hands on deck. That clearly was not her role under the if you go back to the film school guide. But it was everybody doing everything we had to do to get it done.
What about with the editing of the film? Was that a fairly collaborative process, or did you kind of hand it to somebody and just kind of give them how did the editing process? I'm always curious about, once you've got all this documentary footage and you're trying to cram it down into a format for a story, how did that process go for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I've learned from my mistakes. When you do the story, you get so attached to particular parts and pieces that it's really hard for you to detach and say, this is what the true storyline is. And so there's a guy who is a brilliant editor, and I don't even want to say his name because everybody will go to him and start using him. Won't be able to get him back. No, his name's Abai Sofsky, and he lives in Brooklyn, and he's just a tremendous editor. And I took it to him and I just said, here's the footage and we've organized it and we went through it and I would love for you to look at it and tell me what you think the story is. And so that's what he did. And then it was a collaboration really just between he and I of how, okay, what is this? How do we fix this? How do we, and then we took it and sat down with Jeremy Chilnick and Morgan Spurlock and showed them the rough cut. And they're like, well, we think this, So it was just literally, it was a collaboration little by little by little to pull the best story out of there. Because there was probably 25 great stories that you can tell with all of the footage that we got. But there's one best, and we think this was the best that we could have pulled from those 25.
Well, and plus, too, for those who haven't seen the film, it's not only a biography of Pushpa and a little background story of the center she set up, but it also follows some of the kids that are affected by this. And you had 3 to 5 really good, in-depth stories of these kids. We learned a little bit about each of them, some a little more than others, but I would imagine you guys probably had tons of those kids and stories. It's just finding the ones that you felt best exemplified the story you're looking to tell. That's got to be a challenge as well. So.
Yeah, every one of those kids has a unique story, and every one of those kids comes from a situation that you would just listen to and say, "Oh my God, I can't." But what it came down to is we wanted to show the thing from Prashna, who was the little boy who you saw us take out of prison. I was there the day when we were shooting it literally we were shooting that on a cell phone because we weren't supposed to film anything in there, and. To that little boy, to Manju, who's 17 years old, and so we wanted it to be a scope. We wanted it to be boys and girls. We wanted it to feel like everybody was represented from one end of the spectrum to the other, and what Pushpa was able to give each one of them was different. Yet at the same time, they all had this complete admiration and love for her. So, but the stories, there's a story of a little girl that didn't make the film. This little girl was in prison with her father because her father had killed her mother. And then there was another woman in prison across the way in the same prison as where she was. And this woman adopted her from her father so she could come over to the women's side of the prison because she knew she was safer there than she was in the men's prison.
Wow.
So it's like those kind of stories, you're like, oh my gosh. Well, and then she found Pushpa and said, and told, but that little girl considers that, that's my mom. That's my mother. So there were so many great stories like that. We couldn't have possibly told them all. Yeah. And we wanted to keep it. We wanted to make it a short. We wanted it to be less than 40 minutes. We wanted it to tell Pushpa's story. And the reason really was we wanted all of those stories to complement or tell you a little bit more about Pushpa. Yeah. So each time you learned about a child, you learned about another facet of her life that was interesting and revealing, I guess.
Well, that's a great way of summing that up because I felt the same way. I actually felt like I learned more about Pushpa by hearing the kids' stories. Pushpa's in the film. She talks a lot, but she's not the overwhelming character in it necessarily talking on screen. It's all the kids talking about that relationship, and I think it did paint a much, much fuller picture of her.
Well, and I think because of her personality, she is not one that will ever tell you the downside of what's going on or the real. She's a very upbeat, and so even her sister saying, Pushpa got knocked down a lot when she was a kid, and she always rose up and walked away. And these kids, so that perspective of she sees herself in these kids was really interesting that we would have never gotten from just more conversation.
Just interviewing her by herself,
right?
Yeah, gotcha. How long were you guys in Nepal filming this?
So I went over in pre-production and we shot there's some of the shots you'll see, they look real grainy on a mini camera or whatever, but I was over for 3 weeks and then I came back and then we went over for 4.5 weeks. So about 7.5 weeks total that we were there. But it was good because we knew exactly, we didn't have to go far. We knew exactly the story that we wanted to tell, and it was just more figuring out a schedule and how do we tell this in the most effective way.
So you weren't going over there and having to spend a lot of time with research and thinking through. It's like you kind of already knew what you wanted to get. It was really get over there, hit the ground running, and just hit the day planning each day.
Right, and we, and I Skyped with Pushpa, and so she would have it on her phone, and I would even get like the idea of what was around me before we even got there.
That's really cool. So, that's a little use of technology you don't think of in a situation like that. That's amazing. Very cool.
It was great.
Yeah. So, all right. The film's done. You've shown it a few places already. I know several screenings you've had and all. I'm curious because we work in the same corporate video and some other things. I know how I am. Anytime I help shoot or edit something, I don't really like watching stuff that other people have done because it either makes me feel really, really good or really, really bad. And I don't want to feel really, really bad. Do you find yourself, okay, now that this film's done, you've worked on a couple others, you've got another one coming out soon. Do you find yourself watching other documentaries at all, or do you tend to avoid them now because you find them yourself too critical, or what?
I love watching because I think people take different angles at so many different things, and it's interesting to me to see how they've chosen to tell a particular story. And so I like to watch them, and I also like to see, honestly, I like to see what they produce with, 10 times the budget that we had to produce it. Because I think, wow, it kind of makes me feel good. Like, wow, look how much it cost them. And, we have just as nice a shots in some cases. So, but I think what you find, I think, typically with documentary filmmakers is nobody's making any money. There's not anybody out there. I mean, Michael Moore still makes a lot of money, and Morgan Spurlock has done amazing, and that being said, nicest guy in the world as well. But I think that it truly is a collaboration of people who, when you go to the Traverse City Film Festival, you'll see people with exchange of ideas and equipment and talking about this or talking about that, or if you need help on this. I mean, I just called one of the guys the other day to help with a shoot up north somewhere, and and he's like, oh, I know a guy who can hook you up with this or that. And so I think it becomes this, I don't want to say club, but it becomes a very tight network of people who are simply just trying to help others. So if I can get, the story out about Dawn Porter's new film, Spies of the Mississippi, that's going to be on PBS, then great. I should do that. And she'll do the same for mine, and she'll help promote mine, So it's actually a really nice, close-knit community of people.
Well, and I guess that goes to say that it seems like documentary filmmakers, they're not in it for fame and glory. I mean, nobody's going to become maybe the Michael Moores of the world, but nobody's going to become this world famous person from making great documentaries necessarily. So it seems like there is probably more of that deeper good that you're trying to do by telling people stories and getting attention to a good story. So maybe that kind of helps build a little bit of that community that you're talking about.
Well, I think most documentaries, not all, but most documentaries, you never see the person making the film in the film.
True.
Like ours, to kind of turn the corner on some of these, you will hear the question because we didn't get whatever, but you don't see us in the film. Yeah. Like we're not part of the film, because I don't want to be part of somebody else's story. I want their story to really stand and live on its own, because it's their amazing things that they've done, not something that I've done to. I think it trivializes important issues for me to have somebody else in there looking at it saying, well, here's what I think. Well, I don't really care what you think. I want to hear what Pushpa thinks. I want to hear what these kids think. So, that being said, you're certainly not in it then for the glory of it, or you'd move around to the other side of the camera. Yeah. But, in other cases, Morgan Spurlock's a great example. I think he tells the story very, very well because he is in it, and he brings all of this pain on himself, and and so you can see it through his eyes. And he's every guy's guy, right? He's a good-looking guy, and everybody can relate to him. And so that's a very effective way for him to do it as well. So it's different styles, but I think in the end, everybody just wants to tell a good story about something that's true, that to raise awareness of an issue, to raise awareness about a subject, or to raise awareness about a particular environment that's important to them, or that they think should be told and that people should know about.
Talking about raising awareness, how does Nepal, the government of Nepal, how do they feel about you? Have they seen your film, and how do they feel about Waiting for Mamu?
So that was one of the other... I was wondering if somebody would come from Nepal and say, hey, you didn't permit, and you owe us some money. Sure. That hasn't happened yet. But the government actually has been very pleased with the film. I haven't seen the whole thing, but they know the promotion that it's got. They've seen the clips and all of that. And so, and the reason being is because I never call out their government saying, look what you're doing to these kids. I never try to indict them for, the way that they are treating children, because I know that it's not a choice that they unfortunately have. Right. It's just a situation that they have, that they're doing the best that they can. And so in helping Pushpa, I really am helping their government and raising awareness that helps her move forward with hopefully a bigger house and a bigger center and whatever, it's helping them because now they have an outlet where they can send more of these kids. So they've been very receptive. In fact, we're doing a screening in New York. We're having people from the Nepalese, the U.S. Embassy that represent Nepal are coming to the screening. I've been invited to come back to Nepal and meet the president of the country. So,
wow.
I mean, yeah, it's like, now that may be where they handcuff me. I don't know.
It's
but
a trap.
Yeah. But no, I think it's been very, very well received. And, I think it's all been very positive.
Well, it was a good point of what you said too. I mean, throughout the film, yes. I mean, we see the situation in Nepal, and yes, it's a little harrowing in some places. We see what the prison looks like, but the film never comes across as an indictment of the country.
Right.
It's just this is just the culture that's evolved here. This is just where they are. I think the film did a great job of really pointing out that the country has some economic troubles and issues, and that's unfortunately hampering the ability to how they can take care of some of their citizens and how they can provide power across day long. So I thought the film was pretty even-handed, that it didn't point any fingers at anybody as being the bad guy in the film. It was really just, here's the situation we're in. Here's somebody who decided she was going to do something to help improve it. And I think that was really well done.
It seems like that was a choice because it would be all too easy to demonize the country, to try to do that. And, instead you're like, here's the situation, but you focus, thankfully, on the positive and what Pushpa's trying to do. And that was...
Well,
nice.
And so to Pushpa's credit too, she works with a lot of the prison officials and officials in areas so that they know that she's available, and they seek her out now as much as she seeks out these children. It used to be that she talks about the one child that is still her. She calls it. It's an interesting way that she phrases it, but there's the one that got away. There's the one child that she didn't get, and it still pains her just to look at the picture because the government didn't understand what she was trying to do, but. That's changed now, especially when you win the CNN Hero Award, right? But I think it's changed now in that they do understand what she's trying to do. They come there, they see what she's doing, and they think, oh, this is a better way. This is what we should be doing. We need to find outlets for this. But at the same time, they're very, very tight in that they don't want this to become something that is exploited. And so they want Pushpa to lead that cause and be that person who, if there is another center like hers open, that she helps. And it'll probably be the older girls who live with her that open the next center somewhere else.
I can totally see that.
Yeah.
Actually, I see some of the girls that were in the film, the older ones. I think they had really gained a lot of perspective on things from Pushpa and their experience there.
Yeah.
Could totally see that. So Thomas, what are you working on now? What's some things coming up? I know you mentioned these storied streets as being something you're working on there. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually started shooting that documentary a couple of years ago, far before I ever shot Pushpa's doc. And so we edited it, and we liked it, we didn't love it, and so we went back and we pulled it all apart, and now we're re-editing it, and we put some. And it's completely. That's the one I really learned my lesson on. So one of the guys who worked in the production of the film did the editing, and it wasn't until we did this one where we pulled ourselves away, and then I said to Abai, take a look at this footage, and then he found the story that was not as apparent to us because we were just simply too close to it. So so we're re-editing that, and that's going to be really impactful, I think. And then I just got back. It's about
homelessness, right?
Yeah, so we went from L.A. to New York profiling America's homeless, and we don't shy away from any of the issues, but what was really interesting is to find out that 70% of the homeless population you would never know is homeless. And you see these stories of families and kids and addicts and everything. I mean, it's across the board. And even the people who you think, unfortunately in our society, we have this idea that somebody is deserving of being homeless. And I think that even that person with that mindset will change their mind when you see this addict and you hear him tell his story of, he was in a truck accident in eastern Tennessee and he was at high-dose painkillers and that led to heroin addiction. And you suddenly look at it and say, wow, that could be my kid. That could be anybody. So that's completely... I think it'll give a real clear view of the issues and the issue of poverty in our country. Unfortunately, there are people who are homeless just because they're poor and they work full-time jobs and they still don't make enough money to live in a house. So, and then I got back. I shot a couple of episodes of what we hope will be an environmental series in Indonesia.
Oh, okay. Cool.
One was on gold mining, these children gold mining in Indonesia, and really hard life that they live and the loss that they incur from mining gold, which frankly most of it's just for jewelry and cosmetic, and then and the other one was on the lead contamination, where Indonesia's become this dumping ground for batteries, and they drop off lead batteries, and you see these kids knocking the tops off of batteries and pulling the lead out by hand and smeltering them in these to sell back to battery companies to the lead and they're poisoning themselves and their families, but they're in just such dire situations to make a living and to survive that's what they do.
Well, Thomas, I'd say I was excited to see your next films, but Pushpa got me in a good way emotionally, just because it was such an inspiring story, and to see the kids in there. The films, the things you're working on now are probably going to make me upset and mad. So I look forward to seeing it. But
the one thing I think you say that, but the thing that we have in both of those other films, so the homeless one's a little bit different, but in both of the episodes in Indonesia, the one thing we always search out and find is that one champion. We find that one person who, no matter what those odds are, and with one guy in the lead poisoning, we're standing there with him, and I said, if you do this, you may go to prison. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, I know. We're going to do this. Like, it's that important.
Okay.
And you see that, and you're like, wow, man, these guys are willing to give up, just like Pushpa. They're willing to give up everything for this, for these kids who are playing in this park, for that are being contaminated by this lead. And so that's what I like. So we work. There's an educational component that'll come out about each of our film. There's an organization in New York called Facing History and Ourselves. It's a really long title, but they have this thing called Upstanders, and Pushpa fits that. And these guys fit that as somebody who said, no, you know what? I'm going to do something about this, and decide that they're going to.
I'm not going to lay down.
They're going to try basically change the course of history by themselves. And so I think that that's the message that I want people to see. Is that you think that all of these things are insurmountable, but do something, right? The great thing about homelessness, unfortunately, is even though I am not smart enough to figure out the cure for cancer, I can walk out my door and do something about homelessness today. I can walk out and be part of a solution. And so because I can, I must. I have to be engaged. And that's what I hope it brings people to. I hope it brings them to that point where they say, I got to do more than just give $5 to my church and hope that pays for somebody to have a meal. So
one of the things that we typically do on our podcast towards the end is we'll have recommendations, and we want to encourage everyone to seek out Waiting for Mamu and also These Storied Streets when it comes about. We want people to see that. Thomas, you've probably seen more documentaries than I will ever see in my life, because I'm imagining it's what you do. What are some that you think maybe people haven't heard of, but you would encourage people to seek out?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a brilliant filmmaker that I really like her work. Her name is Dawn Porter, and she did it was on HBO this summer, called Gideon's Army, and it's about public defenders and that system of public defenders, and it's really, really well done, and I just think it's a fantastic. And she's got a film coming out called Spies of the Mississippi that'll be on PBS. That I just like the way that she does the work, and the way that it looks, and the way that it feels is just really raw. Okay. And I like that. I like it when it feels. I like it when it hurts like a little bit, and you're like, oh my God. But then you also realize this is a system that we've created. The other films that I like that aren't nearly. There's a film out called Inequality for All. Robert Reich did. That's a great film, and I met Robert Reich when I was in Traverse City. Great guy. There's a guy in Charlotte that did a great film. Jeff Howlett did a great film called A Band Called Death.
Oh,
and I don't know if you know that film, but that guy lives in Charlotte. He's a really he's a
I didn't know he was in Charlotte.
Yeah, he's a terrific.
We had that on our short list of something to screen just recently.
Yeah. He's but you should call Jeff and get him to come and do that. But that's a cool film. So I mean, there's a lot of great documentaries out there, and there's a great documentary that I think is really cool to watch. It's called Beware of Mr. Baker. It's actually on iTunes right now, and I think it's on whatever, but. It's the Ginger Baker documentary, and a guy named Jay Bolger was the director, and Abhay Sasky, my editor, was actually a producer and editor on that film. But it uses in it to the historical parts that you couldn't possibly capture now on film are done in just a really cool animation that is so real that you watch it, and it's just a really interesting way that they've done it. And that guy's just a crazy character too. So that won South by Southwest, I think, last year. But it's a really, really good film. Okay. And The Entrepreneur, I got to say this: The Entrepreneur is a great documentary. You can download that on iTunes. Okay. It's the story of Malcolm Bricklin, who I know. Malcolm was the guy. He was the last guy that I was trying to do the deal for when I left investment banking, believe it or not. But Malcolm brought the Subaru into the United States. He brought the Yugo into the United States. He's a fascinating guy. Yeah. But it's really the roller coaster ride of his life, it is so well done. It's really awesome. It's funny, and it's like heartbreaking, and it's everything all at once. But it's a great film.
Excellent.
That is very. Do you think with so many online avenues nowadays for watching films and all, I mean, is that a good future for what you see the documentary world? I mean, I know me personally, I see so many more documentaries than I probably ever had a chance to living here in Western North Carolina, just because of the online distribution and different channels there. Is that something you think the documentary community is excited about, or do you see that as still maybe a little trepidation there?
I think that it's still so new that there's definitely trepidation. I think that because it's such a great outlet and there's so many potential watchers and people to consume your product that it's great. The problem still seems to be with VOD and any of these kind of things is that there's no way to know how many people really did download it. There's there needs to be something where almost like Facebook where people like it and they push the button and you can see it, and then it's so slow to pay. Really? So like, for example, you may enter into an agreement with a company and they say, well, we pay out quarterly, and then it's 60 days beyond that. So if somebody buys on the very first day of that you're 5 months out before you're getting anything. Jeez. And you don't know how much so that part needs to be definitely worked out. That's the downside of VOD, but I think it's because it's so new. I think it's because that they just haven't really got their arms around the technology, but somebody will come up with a way, and then that will be the place where filmmakers go. And once they figure that out, then all bets are off. I
mean, I'll be the first to say that, I mean, as much as I love Netflix and some of these other services, just about every time I watch a film there, especially a smaller independent film, one of the first thoughts going through my head is, all right, so I wonder if the artist is really benefiting at all from me watching it on Netflix for my $9 a month. And, I think from an exposure standpoint, sure, I guess it's good. More people are seeing your film, more people are hearing your message, but it costs money to make these things. I mean, I guess that would be the downside.
Right. I mean, trust me, there's a filmmaker on the other end thinking the same thing.
Yeah, right. So, I hate to think that basically he's getting a penny and a half from me watching this film, but I don't know. It's got to be the trade-off. I guess it's how many you balance between how many people can see it versus getting some sort of financial compensation.
And honestly, it's still better. It's still better than the alternative of putting it in a DVD box and hoping that it gets on a shelf somewhere in an independent store. That nobody will watch it that way. At least this way, you have some chance. And I think that the more exposure that what's really become interesting though is not just the VOD, but it's become all of the social media that promotes that VOD and drives those numbers to the particular film, and good or bad. Sometimes you go and you're like, wow, they really did a great job of their social media, but their film stinks. But but it's still an avenue to get people engaged and get them to watch the films. But I think more and more people are watching documentary films now because they just want to see the truth.
Yep.
The media has become so crazy, and you don't ever know what truth looks like or what the slant is, or is it political or is it not political or whatever. And so I think people are turning to documentary films to say, I just want to know the full story. I don't want the soundbite. I want to know exactly what happened. And so it's great for the industry. Now, if people would just pay for it, it'd be great.
Well, and I'm not at all trying to draw a parallel, but I think there is a driving force behind it too. You look at all of these reality shows on TV, which 95% of them are just horrible. I mean, I just don't enjoy watching them at all. But I think what we're seeing is a culture of people around us that are getting more and more used to wanting to see what they perceive to be real stories. Now, reality TV, I guarantee most of it's still pretty put on. But I think we are acclimating the society to want to see more of those real stories and see the true stories, and realizing that entertainment doesn't have to be this manufactured, dramatic, scripted thing. It can be something a little more raw and authentic. Yeah. So in a way, I guess reality shows may not be doing the best for our society, but at least they are getting people more acclimated to want to watch things like documentaries.
Well, and I think there's a lot of, there's a huge educational value to these things as well. And so when you see the actual system and you see the way that it works, and you're in a high school or you're in a college and you see these things as, you see the students watch them as well and the questions that they have and all of this, that exposure starts conversations that would have never taken place before. And I think that for parents who want to educate their kids, but at the same time, this is a great way to do it in a way that's entertaining. But at the same time, they're looking at it and saying, "Wow, what is this? I can't even believe this happens." And I think, it just strikes a different conversation and a different way that we frame society as a whole. And I think that is far beyond the way that it's framed in the media. Or it's framed in movies, or where the good guy is always a great-looking actor or whatever. Right now, the good guy in Mamu is a short, slightly overweight Nepalese woman who, it's like. And I want those to be the heroes for my kids. Sure. I don't want the hero to be the guy who's taking a bunch of steroids and can hit a ball over the left field fence. Who cares? Right. I mean, honestly, there's only a couple of those guys, but there's a lot of people like Pushpa. There's a lot of people who can go out and literally change the world. So why don't we promote them? Why don't we promote the people who do it for nothing? Why don't we promote the idea that you can do good and change things and you don't have to be a celebrity? So, very cool. Hopefully that's what these films, and not just mine, everybody's films do the same thing.
That's good. Yeah, I think Thomas, man, thanks so much for coming in and chatting with us.
Wait. I thought I spoiled. There's a song and dance part of this, right?
Right.
I was told very specifically. I've been practicing for a week.
Well, before we hear your song and dance routine, which we're very excited about,
I think we're running out of time.
How can people right now not only learn more about the film Waiting for Mamu, find out how they can maybe see it at some point in the future, but also just in general stay connected with you and find out what kind of stuff you're going to do? Well, go ahead and plug away at this point.
So the best way for Mamu is if you go to if you're on Facebook and you go to Waiting for Mamu, there's a Facebook page. There's also a Thomas Morgan Films Facebook page. Those are great. There's also the www.waitingformamu.com. If you go there, there's a donate button. That donate button is to support documentary films. It's not to support Pushpa.
Okay.
But if you go to Utopia Found, F-O-U-N-D, like I found Utopia, utopiafound.org, you will find a page on there to support Pushpa and her efforts. So what we do with all of our films, and this is a shameless plug for documentary filmmaker, but what we do with all of our films is we set it up in a structure where our investors can get a return on their money. It's not a very big return. It's typically the same as a credit card. They can get a return on their money, and then that's it. And then all the proceeds beyond that point go to that cause. And so for us, it's all the rest of the stuff is trivial. What's really important to us is getting the house built for Pushpa. And so this house will enable these kids to have security for their future when they've been kicked out 5 times in 7 years. It will give her a platform by which she can build the first international first building in the country of Nepal that meets the international standard will be her house. And so all of these screenings promote giving the money to help her build the house. And so we need to come up with $419,000, and we're, I guess, $80,000 less than that now. But all of that stuff, that's what's important to me. When that's done, then I know that the film's been successful. Whether the film itself makes $1 or not, my investors will kill me for saying that. But ultimately, that's the main cause of the film. So that's the message I want to send, is we want to promote Pushpa, her organization, and the good that they're doing.
All right, so waitingformamu.com is one place where they can support some of the documentaries being made.
Right.
utopiafound.org is where they can go and choose to support directly to the Pushpa's project there for the house. Okay.
Right. And then checks sent to
yes, absolutely.
my wife.
We will put your wife's name and mailing address on the post with the episode here. I mean, we joke, but I mean, this is how the stuff gets done. I mean, you make a film. I mean, it obviously costs money to make. It's got a bigger good evolved with it, and we're a bigger thing that we're trying to achieve. So, it's just getting support, getting support for the filmmaking, get support for the projects, so you guys and others can keep making these kind of films and telling these stories. I think that's the important thing.
Well, and thank you for having me on and allowing me to screen and all of that. All of that helps promote the cause. It helps promote films, and hopefully it promotes documentary films as a whole, because I think it's really important right now to see these different viewpoints and start these conversations that will lead to change.
Absolutely.
We hope to have you back for when you're promoting the next, and it's These Storied
Streets. If you go on storiedstreets.com, you'll see it was early on, but a very small clip of that, some of the interviews that we did in that film that are really, really impactful.
Well, I imagine following Thomas Morgan Films on Facebook, they can probably keep up a little bit in the coming months and so as things happen there. So
I am constantly on there updating stuff.
Excellent.
Very good.
So,
Thomas, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us. And thanks for the screening. A really great job with the film. We really enjoyed it. And I've gotten a lot of great compliments from people afterwards that came to see it. Really impressed with what you guys pulled off there. So
thank you very much.
All right.
Excellent.
All right. So this is a kind of an extra for Footcandle Films. We appreciate you listening. Again, we will have all the links in the show notes here that you'll be able to see with the description on both the website. And when you download this episode, just look on the notes. You'll have all the links to the websites we just talked about for where you can learn more about the film, learn more about Thomas and the causes and everything else with that. And I guess, Chris, we'll return back to our normal format with our next show to do some film reviews and talk about some movie news as well. So,
sounds like a plan.
Good. Although it'll be weird to now be talking about, like big blockbuster 3D Transformers crap movies after this.
Will stop by so we can
right.
No problem.
I think Scorsese's waiting out.
Yeah. No, he's actually over in the green room over there waiting. So.
Yeah. He told me there's no green room, right? Scorsese gets a green room.
Yeah,
I'm sitting out in my car, like the engine running. Hold on, 5 more minutes, you can come in.
That's right. Yeah, we do give Scorsese in the green room. It's, little perks there. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Watch news through the courtesy of Footcandle Film Society.
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.